Welcome to Level Up Tribes. Level Up Tribes provides resources to help you attain the necessary resources to level up your mind, body, and soul and realize your full potential. It is about exploring, learning, providing you with the tools from the experts for you to create a better version of yourself. I am your host, Agnes Goodwine, and welcome, Tribes.
Hey, Agnes.
Hi. Well, thank you again for being on Level Up Tribes podcast. I'm super excited to talk to
Yeah.
you and learn about your story. So today I have Jerry Fu. He is a conflict resolution coach for Asian American leaders. He started coaching in 2017 to help other Asian American professionals deal with the challenges they encounter at work, with their families, and within themselves. Prior to starting his coaching business, Jerry worked as a pharmacist and began facilitating leadership workshops in 2012. And today, Jerry offers a range of coaching services, which includes individual coaching, group workshops, and keynote presentations. Welcome to Level Up Tribes podcast. Super excited to talk about your story and this topic, right? Because we all have
Absolutely.
conflict.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Came from like a healthcare background with my family. My grandpa was a physician. I grew up with two cousins who both went to Harvard and became physicians after that. So, high bar set. They said, well, Jerry, if you're a high achiever, you may as well be a doctor too. And then I got a C in organic chemistry when I hit college. And then I said, oh, maybe I don't. Maybe it wasn't as serious as I thought it would be. And still wanted to do healthcare. So I said, well, pharmacy seems like an up and up profession. So I convinced pharmacy school I'd make a good pharmacist. And next thing you know, I go into pharmacy school. From there, ran into some interesting challenges because my mom and I disagreed over what kind of career I was supposed to have as a pharmacist. I enjoyed like the independent pharmacies with better hours. My mom insisted that I work for a chain pharmacy because they had better benefits. And, she and my dad came from over from Taiwan, and my dad, despite having two master's degrees, struggled to find consistent gainful employment. And so my mom said, hey, I don't want you to struggle like your dad did. Just work for this company for 20 years. And eventually, if you play the cards right, you'll finally, have the financial stability to do what you really want. And, my mom never worked a day in her life in pharmacy, but moms know best, right? So by then my conflict aversion was at an all-time high. And I just said, okay, you know what? I don't have the energy to fight her and her plan for my life. So I'm just going to kind of go along with it. And for a season or two, like the job actually was really good. I had flexible scheduling and was able to take a lot of trips I wouldn't have otherwise. But then once that window went away, I realized I was unhappy. I didn't care that I'd earned a third week of vacation after being with the company for 5 years because the other 49 were still terrible. So, I said, well, I need something different, but how do I get a different job when I haven't been working on my career? So the next best thing was to leverage my connections and manage to get a teaching position with the pharmacy consulting company that I moved to Houston for. So I left a full-time job with benefits, which of course my parents were like, what are you doing? Right. And I said, well, I need to try it my own way. I want a job I actually look forward to going to. Like, I think that's better than any benefits you could offer. And so was really excited when I first came down for this job, but then 11 months later got fired. And it was my mistake, because ultimately when I was with my previous job, right, my boss might be mad at me, but as long as I was better than 7% of the workflow, I knew I wasn't going to get in any real trouble. But when I'm at a smaller company that is holding me accountable for the job that it hired me to do, right, telling them stories as to why I didn't get the job done, is not why they hired me. And so that was the sobering lesson, and one I didn't appreciate until I had to fire someone eventually, being a manager. And so that lesson came full circle for sure. At the time, I didn't appreciate it. And then shortly after that first wake-up call came another wake-up call, because I ended up at a House of Cards pharmacy job where 4 of my paychecks bounced while I filled for crooked doctors. Mm-hmm. And so, this guy is, ripping me off, and I'm jeopardizing my license. I'm not even getting paid for it. But again, my conflict aversion said, how do I confront this guy, right? And so after about 9 months of chasing after paychecks and praying they didn't bounce, my friends got me out of that job, got me on with a company that was more legitimate, but couldn't pay me more than 8 hours a week. And so I said, well, now what do I do? And they said, well, if you are willing to drive out to Austin, which is about 2.5 hours away from where I live in Houston, you can get more hours out there. I said, well, beggars can't be choosers. I could end up in more cities, but it just wasn't home. And so I'm working in Austin, no idea what my life is going to look like. And that summer was key. This is 10 years ago now. I was tapped to help with some leadership seminars that my friends were running through a pharmacy leadership nonprofit. And something about teaching leadership kind of changed something in my mind, where I said before, leadership is hard. I'm not good at it. So I don't know if I'll ever be good at it. And now I thought to myself, well, what if I could be a good leader? How would I carry myself? What kind of work would I need to do? And so when a full-time manager position opened up in Houston a couple months later, it was a no-brainer for me. I loved my Austin work team, but I knew I couldn't stay there. So I was looking forward to coming home, looking forward to taking on these leadership challenges. And then the following year, I proceeded to get written up because my technicians are not pulling their weight and I am not disciplining them or firing them. And so management said, your passivity is a problem, right? Like, it's grace can only go so far, like in a work situation, right? It's like at some point you're going to run out. And so while I was on probation, the company had their funding pulled. And so while I'm looking for work, the only reason I get another interview with another company was that I had leadership experience on my resume. And so I tell people all the time, leadership is what saved my career. And I was thankful that I had more job options now because I have credibility. Yeah. The challenge, though, was that these jobs are like icebergs. The smaller jobs and smaller companies that offer higher quality of life for pharmacists don't last very long, typically. They usually last like 1 or 2 years, they melt, and then you have to hop to another one. And so 5 years ago, when my previous employer went under, I said, I'm tired of chasing after scripts and tired of fighting insurance companies, but I love people development, which I've done, since then, since I started 10 years ago. And so I said, well, what if I tried to have a career in coaching and facilitating? And still very scared of rejection and failure. So it was more like an occasional hobby. And then during the pandemic, said, okay, how much longer am I going to wait? Finally figured out how to file an LLC, get a bank account open, get a website up. And, it's still try, struggle, fail, right? Most of my revenue that covered my expenses my first year came from private tutoring. Actually, I had a couple coaching gigs, but not enough to cover the expenses that I had during starting up. But people tell me if you can make it 2 years, then you have a fighting chance. But so here we are. Yeah.
So did you join like coaching company, like how to become a coach?
Yeah. There's a combination of training that I did. So the facilitating that I did through this nonprofit started to incorporate some coaching literature. So that was when we first learned about this is what it takes to coach. And then the next part after that, though, was that, there's an organization called the International Coaching Federation. And, they're like this credentialing body because coaches are a lot like contractors. There's no real way to verify if someone's a legitimate, coach, right? So many people declare themselves coaches. And so the ICF tries to, establish some level of quality control. And so I went through one of their programs, and after finishing the training, if you want to get a credential, you have to submit an application after you've done a minimum number of hours. The entry level is 100. And so, that's where I formally got training to say, hey, you know what, I really want to show that I'm serious. And so with that in mind, right, some individuals may or may not care that you have a credential. But if you expect to get any corporate or government contracts, that is the first place to look to show that, is this guy really, serious about his craft? So
that's
awesome.
The idea.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you saw a need in the Asian American community. What kind of need did you see in the Asian American community in the workplace that you said, you know what, this is where I want to focus on?
Yeah, I joke and say, sometimes you don't choose it, sometimes it chooses you.
That's
right?
True. Yes.
And this is one of those cases because, I've realized that a lot of my challenges around being a leader came from my willingness and ability to have difficult conversations, right? Like I talked about how I struggled to write people up or fire them because I know how painful it was. And the flip side is that you don't realize what that's costing you until you're the boss. When you realize, hey, I'm not moving quickly enough to write this person up or discipline them in a way that it's not meant to be punitive, but meant to be restorative. And that's something I had to appreciate in looking back at my own journey, was recognizing, hey, these guys aren't writing me up to set me up just to fire me. And even if that's true, being in probation is my opportunity to prove to them, you know what, I'm going to grow and change the way you tell me I need to, right? And to have that humility to say, you know what, I don't have to look at this and as an affront. I can look at this as done out of love. And
Yeah,
I mean, same thing with getting fired, right? Yeah, we don't exchange Christmas cards, but
true.
it was a loving thing to do, was to fire somebody, and that included me, to say, hey, look, whatever you're doing, like according to our standards, it's not going to cut it here, and
Yeah.
you should move on, and we need to move on. So yeah, just to be able to give other Asian American leaders that confidence to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, like I need to speak up. Like this isn't okay. I don't like it when my boss takes credit for my work. I don't like it when other people ask me for favors because they know I'm too nice to, tell them no.
Yes.
My clients will ask me, hey, Jerry, how do I handle it? How do I handle this, right? When I need to say no to these other favors because I'm not getting my own work done. But I don't want to, have that come back on me later when I need a favor and they say, you know what? No, you didn't help me out earlier. It's like, but they let that fear get to them. And I mean, because I let it get to me too. Like, well, let me be a nice guy and help out because I don't know when that karma will come back and
Yeah.
hurt me.
And the reason I asked that is because, I've worked for, as a professional and as a manager myself and involved with diversity programs at my current employer, because the workforce is changing. And so, there's more Asian Americans, there the Latino communities. So the workforce overall is changing so much. You do need to prepare yourself in regards to conflict resolutions when you're dealing with people from other cultures and other backgrounds. So I'm excited to hear that you're bridging that gap with the Asian American community in the workforce. How has that been received?
Yeah, I mean, it's been great hearing people, kind of champion for my services, right? Because
Wow.
well, it's on, yeah, because it can help on two fronts, right? First is just for Asian American leaders to realize, hey, you know what? I can have a voice. I need to find it and share it, right? And on the flip side, it's true for people who employ Asian Americans to say, hey, how do I make sure I get through to them? Because what's the default, right? Hey, how are things going? Oh, it's fine, boss. Don't worry about it, right? Because we don't, that they're like the office might be on fire, right? And we're just like, no, 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 boss, it's contained. And then you don't find out until much later that actually things were wrong. And now it's like, oh man, I wish they had said something earlier, because they're afraid to just say anything that might upset their boss when they realize that that short-term reassurance is going to cost them in the long run. So
Yes.
yeah, so to give people a chance to say, hey, you know what? No, let me own up to things if not things aren't going great, or to be more open about things with my boss and be more proactive to say, okay, boss, right? This didn't go quite as I expected. Here's my efforts 1, 2, and 3. What do you suggest I try now? And that was that was the other thing to realize. It's like, hey, don't just ask your boss for help. Say, boss, I don't know how to do this. Help me. It's like, no, demonstrate that you made the effort and have that evidence available. Because if you don't have it, it's hard to make the case that you did anything.
Yes, absolutely. I've
Sure.
always been good at identifying that big elephant in the room. I don't like having that big elephant in the room
Good.
without noticing the elephant in the room.
Good.
The only thing that I do have to work on, Jerry, is the fact that because I want to approach conflict resolution,
Mhm.
is being aware, having self-awareness that some people might be uncomfortable with how I'm approaching conflict
Mhm.
resolution. Just because I'm comfortable with it doesn't mean that my staff is comfortable with it. So
Mhm.
what I've been trying to work on myself as a supervisor is just trying to find that medium to say, someone, might have a hard time. Let's see how I can approach it from
Mhm.
a good place where they don't feel uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you try to charge ahead head on, right? Sometimes people just like put up their dukes because they're like, oh, don't. Um,
Yeah.
and I understand that because I've done it. I've been on the receiving end of it. And yeah, if you're ready for it, great. If not, no one
Mhm.
likes getting blindsided. But a book that helped me out, that I'm happy to share the title of, is called Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein. And
Oh,
it just does such a great job of saying, hey, I tell people, if you don't have courage, like, use curiosity instead, right? And you can just say something like, hey, help me understand, right?
hmm.
Like, this project didn't seem to go as expected, and here are my expectations, and this is what I expected, this is what I got. I have my story about what happened, but I have no way of verifying it. Can
I love
you,
it.
offer your perspective on this so that it doesn't happen again? Right. And
Yeah.
so you involve curiosity, you involve collaboration, and now people, when you come in from the side, right, at a gentler angle, maybe it's a lot easier to kind of get more of that input and dialogue that you need
Yeah.
from them. And so even though you're talking about something uncomfortable, they realize like they don't have to be uncomfortable, even though you're talking about something uncomfortable.
Oh, I love that. Can you give us at least like maybe your top five ways of if someone is having a conflict at work or not just really at work, just with anything, what would be your top five things to do before approaching someone?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a framework I make available for free on my website, and so we can talk through those, and then
Yes,
we can
please.
dovetail some tips on that. So the first thing I would say, the one tip before I go into the official framework is number one is acknowledge that things are broken, right? So you say something like, "I'm sorry things aren't better between us," or "I'm sorry that this project didn't go as planned," right? So you're not taking responsibility for anything that you didn't do, right? Because it's not fair to say, well, you should have seen that coming. It's like, well, let's not go there. Let's just acknowledge that something is broken and we need to fix
Mhm.
it, right? So the first tip that I offer on my framework is to imagine what a successful conversation would sound like. And so success may or may not be restoring the relationship to 100%. Success might mean a truce to say, hey, you know what, we shouldn't talk about politics or religion because it just doesn't go anywhere. Success might mean terminating the relationship. Hey, you know what? Um, and this has to stop. I'm happy to kind of help dust you off your resume and make sure that you can land on your feet, but it's going to have to be at another company, right? The second step is to find 10 seconds of courage to initiate the conversation, right? Whether it's find 10 seconds to send that email, send that text, pick up the phone, right? People think, oh, I don't feel brave enough and I need to feel brave enough to have this conversation. It's like, that might take 3 weeks, that might take
Yeah.
3 months. And this is coming from someone who is is averse, because I have to use the system all the time to overcome my default to just staying comfortable, right? And so, yeah, I tell people you don't have to be a superhero, just be a superhero for 10 seconds. Set the ball in motion, lock the gate behind you, and that way you have to move forward, right? The third step is to script your critical moves and say, okay, here are the things I need to bring up. Don't let them rattle around in your head. Get them down on paper, right? Organize your thoughts, and anticipate what kind of pushback or rebuttals you might get. And then think about how you want to respond to those, right? If you're asking your boss for a raise, what might your boss say, right? Oh, well, money's tight right now. We really can't afford to compensate any extra. It's like, well, how do I make a bigger case as to why I still deserve this raise, right? Step 4 is to rehearse those critical moves, right? So train in the dojo before you get out on the street. Get your reps in practice before the actual game. And so now let me iron out words or phrasing I trip over, right? Let me check my body language in the mirror. Let me check my tone. How's this looking, right? How's my posture? And get your friends to role play with you. Hey, can you pretend to be this boss that I know I'm going to have to fight or negotiate a raise for? And then step 5 is to do it, because action is what separates dreams from reality, right? As one cliche might say. Because at the end of the day, a successful business or a successful person is not built on ideas that never, happened, right? Successful businesses and people have a track record of results. And when when you are willing to generate results, even if they're not where you want them to be, that is your opportunity to get them to where you want them to be. And so that's what I usually use to help people like find a lighted staircase from where they are now to where they want to be.
Never really thought about writing the list
Mhm.
or a script. That's awesome. I love that
Yeah.
idea. So are you working with individuals or are you working with companies right now? Like who is your audience and who is your clientele, I guess I should say?
Yeah, yeah. So I can work with individual clients, and I have, where Asian professionals in their 20s and 30s that realize, hey, you know what I grew up hearing wasn't working anymore. the way they handle conflict at my company is different the way I handle conflict at home. How do I navigate this? And then I also work with organizations to say, hey, how do you establish a culture where conflict is not something to be avoided, right? Where people can say, hey, yeah, we can have open and difficult conversations and disagree without being disrespectful. So whether you're an individual or a company that involves Asian leaders, I am here for you.
I love that so much. I live in Phoenix, but I work for the city of Mesa, and Mesa has a district that the Asian population is growing so much. I do voter outreach, and so that's one area where I really want to dive in, is the Asian community. I'm super excited that you're doing this, for your people. It's needed. Do you think that you'll have a book in regards to conflict resolution coming up in the near future?
Funny that you asked that. I'm actually working on a chapter for a leadership anthology I was invited to contribute to. So the first draft will actually be due fairly soon at the time of this recording. So yeah, be on the lookout.
That's awesome.
Let's hope my sloppy first draft, doesn't get beat up too badly. But yeah, hopefully everything should be finalized by the summer. I'll actually be working on it a lot after I hop off the podcast. So wish me luck.
Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be
Yeah,
fine.
but I'll keep you all posted. Yeah, as progress happens, and we'll definitely have to
Yes. If you ever write, if that book ever comes out, yeah, you're welcome back to Level Up Tribes podcast. I love the growth. So what about the pharmacist? So is that over and done?
Oh, no, actually, I'm still in the middle of it. I
you
still
are?
have a
Okay.
day job, as a pharmacist, and I'm
Cool.
still, because right now, right, if I'm being candid, like any revenue I make in my coaching business is still at like hobby level and not like career pivot level. And so, I'm just in the middle of it like everybody else. And so,
I love it.
ideally, I hustle, hard enough, fast enough to get enough clients to justify being able to transition out. If I do stay in pharmacy, it'll be as a coach or consultant. It won't be as a day-to-day pharmacist. It is definitely a network that needs a lot. I know there's a lot of pharmacists turn coaches to either help with recovery, burnout recovery, or
Wow.
career pivots. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of pharmacists that are transitioning out to different careers because the field it's definitely gotten much more saturated the last couple of years.
Yeah, one of my close friends, she's a pharmacist, and we went through yoga teacher training together. And so we all have that one thing that we love so much that kind of, you just never know. It's like you think your journey is this way, but then it turns out to be a whole different direction, right? But, baby steps,
Yeah. No, there's one of my favorite books I usually walk people through. I'm not certified in their methods, but Designing Your Life and Designing Your Work Life, it's just been such a great way to network and realize that you have so many more opportunities to actually shape the kind of career you want and life you want than you realize. And when people are more willing to experiment and recognize, hey, what worked for you now may not work 10 years from now, right? And to be open to that, because too often we have this fixed idea of success. I know I do. And realizing that, even if I do get to a point where I do have enough passive income to like just be able to sit back and relax and just live life at a slower pace, that might not satisfy me in 5 or 10 years, and I'm going to look for something else.
That's true. Have you traveled to Taiwan?
It's been a while. I last went over 10 years ago, and it's been hard. Once I moved to Texas, I didn't travel as much internationally as I used to up until recently. Before, I used to take regular trips to Taiwan to see family. And then after I moved to Texas, it kind of dropped off because my work schedule, I let my work schedule get in the way of things. Or when I did have vacation time, I used it to go to other places like Beirut or Haiti or Canada. So it's tough when you say yes to one thing, you say no to another. But so we'll see when now that travel's hopefully opened up a little more now with the pandemic. Hopefully we'll see what kind of opportunities visit Taiwan again come up.
So one fun fact before we dive back to our conflict resolution topic is that you love salsa dancing.
there it is.
I
Yeah.
read. Yeah. So I'm a huge, salsa dancer because I am from Puerto Rico, and so that's
Yeah.
big in my island.
Yeah.
How were you introduced to salsa dancing?
Yeah. It's a habit or a hobby I never would have expected to choose, but now it's just consumed my life in such a wonderful way. Um, yeah, so that journey is it started in college. So my freshman year, my college hosted a spring formal that had salsa dancing as their theme. But the problem is that the lesson they taught was terrible. Like they didn't teach us anything useful or fun. And so we just said, what's the point? And so again, me having a very fixed mindset about a lot of things, I said, well, I don't get it. I don't think I'll ever get it. So let me just shelf this forever. And so when I got to pharmacy school, where I was in Memphis, a friend of a friend who she was Taiwanese, but grew up in Belize, and she was like, "You got to give it another shot. Like
Yeah.
you can't give up on it that easily." And I said, "Fair enough." So I took real lessons after my grades kind of solidified to a point where I just got sick of studying, and I said, "You know what? Let me take some real lessons." And then started to kind of get past that initial critical point where you're like, okay, I have some basic level of competence now, and it's like, hey, you know what, this is kind of fun. Then I moved to a city after I graduated, which had no salsa dancing, so went through a lot of tough years of like rust and lack of confidence, but I miss it. And so it was just like this dormant skill for a while. And then even after I moved back to Houston 12 years ago, because I was originally here for college, I all the friends that I met when I got reconnected to the city were all into country dancing and two-stepping. So it was still a dormant thing. Like there would still be like glimpses of brilliance that were great, but it stayed again rusty. But then I
Yeah.
tell people. I tell people 8 years ago now, I went to a free salsa dancing event that some friends of mine told me about, and all it took was one skilled, pretty blonde, and I said I have to dance with her, and I brought my A game. I was locked in the whole time, and it was just like, oh my goodness. She gave me a hug afterward, and I said, why
I
did I stay
love
away
it.
from this for so long? And so now, yeah, I just got back into it more regularly, and yeah, like it's just I've met so many fun people because they're musical and they're creative and they're
Yeah.
active.
Yeah.
And yeah, my Spanish has gotten a little better, but it's still frustrating when it gets shot down because they'll be like, "Quiere bailar?" And they'll be like, "No." And it's like, come on, like give me one dance. I know I don't look it. Okay.
That's awesome. I'm super glad you like the salsa dance. So, is there anything else you would like to add or discuss that perhaps we didn't touch on today?
I'll share one story, I think, just to illustrate, I think, what we're all trying to help people get toward. At one point, I was at an international multicultural networking event in Houston, and I met an older white gentleman. We'll call him Tim, and this is during the height of the Asian hate crimes that happened in Atlanta, right? Like it just happened.
Yeah.
And so he asked me about it, and he's like, "Hey, these Asian hate crimes in the media, like, is it like, have you dealt with anything personal? Like, is it really this big a deal? Like, have you seen anything?" And I said, "Well, in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, well, people are dying. Like, that's never a good thing." Even though there was this degree that news media was just sensationalizing this for ratings, like they didn't care that much, and in a way that was
Mhm.
kind of true, but I saw this as an opportunity to just kind of stretch him a little bit, just to say, hey, you know what? Let me just throw out some information, see what he responds to. And so I said, well, hey Tim, so can I share something with you? He's like, sure. And I said, okay. Did you know that Houston's Chinatown is built on discrimination? And he goes, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, at one point the city officials felt that Asians were a threat, so they sequestered them all in the southwest part of the city. And then after they did, they drew up the district in such a way where they don't have a vote. And he goes, huh. And I said, yeah, it's not great. And, have I experienced any personal racial epithets or disparaging remarks or any physical violence? No, and I'm thankful. But
Yeah.
there is a greater system of discrimination and oppression that is in place that is not okay just because people aren't getting hurt. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I said, okay, well, it was just my opportunity. I wasn't there trying to embarrass him, but this is the vision that I would to have for anybody, regardless of whether or not you're Asian, right? When someone kind of says something that could be considered offhand or off-putting, and you give them the benefit of doubt, and at the same time you don't condone the fact that this is, that the thought process might be faulty. And so to be able to engage in this conversation, kind of be able to step into that discomfort just even a little bit, and then also just kind of release, just to say, hey, look, this isn't okay, and we're going to hold each other to a better standard so that everyone can be seen, heard, and respected, I think is just better for everybody.
Well said, Jerry. Would you like to give your website information or social media so people can start following you?
Sure. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, but all the good stuff happens at the website, which is www.adaptingleaders.com. And if you want to check out the specific guide where I walk you through the 5 steps, that's available for free. Go to www.adaptingleaders.com/guide. And that's all there.
Well, thank you again for connecting with me. I wish you the best.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening. Please visit the website at www.leveluptribes.com. And please subscribe to the podcast and share with your family and friends. Be sure to tune in to our next episode. Catch you all next time, my beloved tribes.